Welcome to the Deep Dive. We love to go deep on all things tech and business, and today we're diving into the world of business analysis in agile environments.
It's a fascinating area.
Definitely, and our source material comes from BCS, the Chartered Institute for IT.
A great resource.
Over 70,000 tech professionals around the globe are members.
So there's a lot of expertise packed in there.
Think of this deep dive as your shortcut to understanding what all of their insights mean for you, no matter what your role is.
Now, traditionally, agile methodologies haven't always explicitly included a business analyst role.
Right, it's like they just kind of forgot about the business's part. But why is business analysis even more crucial in these fast-paced agile projects? That's what we're going to unpack.
We'll even look at how business analysis can help make sure an organization's IS investments are being used wisely.
That's a big one. Nobody wants to see their budget going down the drain. So let's address that tension between Agile's need for speed and thorough business analysis.
It's a real tension for sure, but it's important to remember that Agile isn't just about speed.
Okay, so we're not just rushing to things.
Right, it's about delivering value quickly.
Got you. So finding that sweet spot where we're moving quickly, but also making sure every step is actually driving value.
Exactly, and that's where business analysis comes in. It helps us define what value means for each specific project. And remember the Agile Manifesto with its emphasis on individuals and interactions over processes and tools.
Oh, yeah.
Well, good business analysis champions that very idea.
So it's not about blindly following processes. It's about understanding the why behind the what and fostering that collaboration.
Yes. A great example is the UK Department for Work and Pensions. They describe the BA as the critical friend,
I like that.
making sure the project vision is actually realized and that everyone's needs are met.
The critical friend, not just someone who's churning out documents, but a real partner. And even though a lot of agile methodologies might not explicitly say business analyst, the need for those skills is woven into the very fabric of agile principles.
Absolutely. The principle of business people and developers must work together daily really calls for a skilled communicator to bridge the gap between those two worlds.
Someone who can speak both languages, tech and business.
Exactly, and that's where the idea of the generalizing specialist comes in.
Okay, break that down for me.
Visualize a T-shaped professional.
I'm picturing it.
They have this broad knowledge across many areas, but then deep expertise in one or two specific areas.
Like a T.
Right? And in an agile team, the BA is often that T. They have that deep understanding of what the business needs and how those needs translate into actionable tasks for the developers.
So they're not just a cog in the machine. They're strategic thinkers, making sure everyone understands the big picture and how all the pieces fit together.
And that brings us to a really crucial point, understanding the why behind a system.
It's like Simon Sinek's start with why, right?
Exactly. It's not enough to just say, we need to build feature X. We need to understand why we're building it, what value it brings to the customer, and how it aligns with the overall business goals.
I'm getting flashbacks to all those pointless projects I've been a part of where no one could articulate the why.
It happens all the time. So imagine you're opening a cafe.
Sounds delicious.
The goal isn't just obtain equipment to make drinks.
Right, that's just a task.
Exactly. That's what's called functional decomposition, focusing on the tasks. But instead, we need to start with the why, creating a welcoming space where people can connect over amazing coffee.
Now you're speaking my language.
That's goal decomposition, and it leads to increments that actually deliver tangible value to the customer.
And when we talk about customers, we often think of them as the end users, the people sipping lattes in our cafe.
Right.
But in an agile project, customer takes on a much broader meaning.
Absolutely. Developers, project stakeholders, even the tech architects, they all consume the outputs of your analysis
They're customers too.
with their own needs and expectations.
So understanding those different perspectives and tailoring your approach accordingly becomes really important.
Exactly. And this is where service science emphasizes the concept of value in use. Value isn't just exchanging money for a product or service. It's co-created with the customer through their actual use of that service.
It's not a one-way street.
Right. Value is subjective, and it depends on the context. So what's valuable to a developer might be totally different from what's valuable to the marketing team, even though they're both working on the same project.
Now let's talk about how specific agile practices intersect with business analysis. Where do they really meet?
That's where things get really interesting. Let's take backlog refinement, for example.
Okay?
The BA plays a key role in making sure that backlog is ruthlessly prioritized and that it reflects real business needs, not just a random list of nice to have.
They're like the master organizer, making sure everything aligns with the big picture.
Exactly. And then there's user story development.
Ah, yes, chooser stories. Those are crucial in agile.
They are. And this is where techniques like story mapping and behavior-driven development, or BDD, come in.
Okay, remind me what those are again.
Story mapping helps you visualize the user's journey through the system and break down large, complex requirements into manageable chunks that the team can actually work with.
It's like taking that giant recipe and breaking it down into step-by-step instructions.
Exactly. And BDD ensures that everyone understands what done actually looks like for each user story. No more ambiguity.
Love it. Clear expectations make everything so much smoother. And what about iteration planning and management?
Well, that's where BAs facilitate communication and help the team stay laser-focused on delivering business value during those short sprints.
So it's not just about coding blindly. It's about making sure each iteration is actually pushing us towards that ultimate goal, that delicious cup of coffee for our customer.
That's the goal, and it's a delicate dance between embracing change but also making sure we deliver what really matters. But let's be honest, adopting Agile isn't always smooth sailing, is it?
You're telling me, especially for larger organizations or complex projects, it can feel like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole.
You're right. Resistance to cultural change, the difficulty of scaling agile practices, adapting to different contexts, these are all very real challenges.
So Agile is not a one-size-fits-all solution. It requires careful consideration and adaptation. Are there any tools that can help teams navigate these challenges?
Absolutely. Scott Ambler's software development context framework is a fantastic tool.
What does that do?
It helps teams analyze and address those potential roadblocks you mentioned.
So it's not about blindly following rules, but about understanding your specific context and tailoring your Agile approach accordingly.
That's the key.
We've only just scratched the surface of business analysis in an Agile world.
There's so much more to explore.
Join us for part 2, where we'll explore some practical techniques for modeling the business context, understanding your stakeholder, and defining how your system will function in a way that actually works in an Agile environment. You won't want to miss it.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Agile business analysis.
We're ready to roll up our sleeves and get into the nitty-gritty of how BAs actually do their work in an Agile environment. Last time we talked about the why business analysis is so essential in Agile. Now let's talk about the how.
Excellent point. And a great place to start is by really understanding that business context.
Okay,
It's like setting the stage before the actors even come on.
I like that.
You need to understand the big picture, the forces shaping the business, the goals, the constraints you're working within.
Right, because if you don't understand the playing field, how can we even begin to strategize? So how do BAs go about modeling this complex business context in a way that actually works in Agile?
Well, one approach is to look at both the internal and external environments.
Okay,
What trends, opportunities, and threats are out there? And internally, what strengths and weaknesses do you need to consider?
it's like that SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. But with an Agile twist, you need to be constantly scanning the environment for changes and adapting your approach accordingly.
Exactly. And remember, these environments aren't static. They're constantly evolving.
Right.
So your understanding of the business context needs to evolve too. It's an iterative process, just like Agile development itself.
Gotcha. So it's all about being flexible and adapting to new information as it comes in.
Exactly. Which brings us to business architecture.
Business architecture sounds a bit intimidating.
Don't worry, it's not as complex as it might sound.
Okay, good.
Two key elements of business architecture are particularly relevant to Agile BA's value streams and business capabilities.
Break those down for me, starting with value streams. What are those?
Think of a value stream as the flow of activities that actually create value for a specific customer group.
Okay,
It's like mapping out the customer journey
okay.
from the initial point of contact all the way to the final delivery of that product or service.
So if we go back to our cafe example,
Yes.
the value stream might start with a customer walking in the door, ordering their latte, enjoying the ambience, maybe even reading a book, and then leaving with a smile on their face.
Exactly. And each step in that journey contributes to the overall value the customer experiences. Now, business capabilities represent what the organization actually does to deliver that value.
So in our cafe, the capabilities might be things like brewing that delicious coffee, creating that welcoming atmosphere, providing excellent customer service.
Precisely. By understanding these capabilities, BAs can identify areas for improvement, figure out which resources are needed, and make sure the organization is structured effectively to actually deliver that value.
So it's about understanding what the business actually does in order to deliver the why, the value for the customer.
Exactly. Now let's move on to modeling techniques.
Ah, yes. Models, those visual representations that help us make sense of all this complex information. I love a good diagram. But how do you actually use models effectively in an Agile world?
That's a great question. It's all about balance. Remember the Agile Manifesto values, working software over comprehensive documentation.
Right, so we're not trying to create these massive documents that no one ever reads.
Exactly. So models should be used strategically as tools to facilitate communication and understanding, not as ends in themselves.
So it's about creating just enough documentation to be helpful without getting bogged down in unnecessary detail.
Exactly. And there are actually different types of models that BAs can use, each providing a different perspective on the problem.
Like what?
Well, for example, a business process model maps out the steps involved in a particular process, while a data model shows how information is structured and flows through the system.
And don't forget about those informal models too, like sketching something out on a whiteboard during a brainstorming session.
Oh, absolutely. Those are so valuable for sparking ideas and getting everyone on the same page.
It's all about choosing the right model for the right situation and using it to foster collaboration and that shared understanding.
Exactly. One popular modeling technique is the functional model map, or FMM. It provides a really holistic view of the business, showing how all the different processes, people, and systems actually interact with each other.
So it's like a blueprint that helps you understand the interconnectedness of everything.
Exactly. And you can use the FMM at different levels, from a high-level overview of the entire organization to a detailed view of a specific process or system. It's a super versatile tool that can be adapted to fit the needs of any Agile project.
Speaking of different perspective, let's talk about stakeholders.
Ah, yes.
They're the
Stakeholders.
lifeblood of any project, right?
They are. And in an Agile environment where collaboration is king, understanding your stakeholders and their needs is absolutely crucial.
But stakeholders is a pretty broad term. We've got customers, developers, project managers, executives. The list goes on and on. How do you even begin to categorize all these different groups?
That's a great point. One way to think about it is to consider their level of involvement in the project. Some stakeholders are going to be directly affected by the solution you're developing,
Right.
while others might have a more indirect interest.
So going back to our cafe, the baristas are definitely directly affected because they're the ones who will be using that new coffee machine or the point of sale system. But what about the suppliers who deliver the coffee beans? They're stakeholders too, but they're maybe not as directly involved in those day-to-day operations.
Precisely. And understanding the different levels of involvement can help BAs tailor their communication and engagement strategies.
So it's not about bombarding everyone with the same information. It's about being strategic and targeted in your approach.
Exactly. It's about meeting stakeholders where they are and providing them with the information they need.
In a way that's clear, concise, and actually relevant to them.
Exactly. Now let's dig into the specific roles that stakeholders might hold on an Agile project.
Okay?
And remember, these roles might be fluid in an Agile environment. People might wear multiple hats, and responsibilities might shift as the project evolves.
So it's not about rigidly defining who does what, but rather about creating that collaborative environment where everyone can contribute their expertise.
Exactly.
Now, I'm curious about those governance roles. Who are the key players in making sure the project stays on track and actually meets its objectives?
Well, at the top, you have the project sponsor. Think of them as the champion of the project.
Okay.
They provide the funding and ultimately approve the deliverables.
So they're like the executive producer making sure the show stays within budget and delivers on its promise to the audience.
That's a great analogy. Then you have the business managers who oversee the teams that are going to be directly impacted by this solution.
Right.
They're often the owners of their requirements and provide really valuable insights into those business needs.
So they're like the directors making sure the actors know their lines and the scenes flow smoothly.
I like it. And of course, you have the project manager who keeps the project running smoothly, manages the risks, makes sure everything's delivered on time and within budget.
The stage manager making sure everyone's in the right place at the right time and the show goes on without a hitch.
Exactly. Now, what about the architectural roles? These are the folks who are ensuring the technical integrity of the solution.
Okay, so these are our tech wizards.
In a way, you have the business architect who makes sure the solution actually aligns with the overall business architecture, the structure, and behavior of the business system.
So they're like the set designers making sure the stage is set up correctly and everything fits together cohesively.
Love it. Then you have the solution architect who designs that technical solution, and the software architects who focus on the specific software components.
Okay, so they're like the lighting and sound engineers making sure everything looks and sounds amazing.
Perfect. And then you can't forget the data architects who make sure the data is structured and managed effectively.
Right, they're like the librarians making sure the information is organized and accessible to everyone who needs it.
Great analogy. And finally, we have the stakeholders within the development team itself, the developers, the testers, and of course, the business analysts.
Ah, yes, the stars of the show. The ones who actually bring the vision to life.
Exactly. Now the question is, how do BAs actually navigate these complex stakeholder relationships in an Agile environment?
It sounds like a juggling act.
It can be. It's all about communication, collaboration, and empathy.
Those are essential skills for any BA, for sure.
They are. BAs need to be able to understand different perspectives, build trust, and facilitate effective communication between all those different stakeholders.
So they're like the diplomats building bridges and making sure everyone's speaking the same language.
Precisely. They bring everyone together, align those expectations, and make sure the project stays on track to actually deliver value to the customer.
And speaking of delivering value, let's talk about goals.
Ah, yes, goals.
Those beacons of light that guide us through the darkness. But how do you define goals effectively in an agile environment where, let's face it, everything is constantly changing?
That's a great question. And it brings us to one of the most important concepts in agile business analysis: goal decomposition.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more. What is goal decomposition and why is it so crucial in agile?
Goal decomposition is basically breaking down large, complex goals into smaller, more manageable chunks.
Okay.
It's like taking a big, hairy, audacious goal and slicing it up into bite-sized pieces that the team can actually tackle one at a time.
So it's about creating a roadmap, breaking down that long journey into manageable steps that ultimately lead to the destination.
Exactly. And this is crucial in Agile because it allows teams to deliver value incrementally.
Gotcha.
Instead of waiting until the very end of the project to see results, they can achieve smaller goals along the way, which keeps everyone motivated and provides early feedback.
It's like those milestones you see on a hiking trail. They give you a sense of progress and keep you going when the going gets tough.
Exactly. Now, how does goal decomposition differ from that traditional approach of functional decomposition?
Okay, good question. Fill me in.
Well, functional decomposition focuses on breaking down a process into its individual functions or tasks without necessarily considering the overall goal.
So it's like taking apart a clock to see how all the gears and springs work,
Yeah,
but not really understanding why the clock is important or what purpose it
a
serves.
perfect analogy. Goal decomposition, on the other hand, starts with the why, that desired outcome, and then works backward to identify the steps needed to achieve it.
So it's like understanding that the clock is important because it tells us the time, and then figuring out how to build a clock that actually accurately keeps time.
Exactly, and this focus on the why makes sure that every increment is delivering tangible value to that customer. It's not just about completing tasks, it's about achieving meaningful outcomes.
Outcomes over outputs.
Exactly. Now, to really understand how goals are structured, we need to talk about goal levels.
Goal levels. Sounds kind of mystical.
Not really. Think of goal levels as a hierarchy with high-level goals representing the big picture and then lower-level goals representing the specific steps needed to achieve them.
Okay.
Alistair Cockburn, who's a well-known figure in the Agile community, introduced this really helpful framework for understanding these goal levels.
So going back to our cafe, what might those goal levels actually look like?
Well, at the very highest level, the goal might be create a thriving cafe business. That's the big picture.
Right, that's the North Star guiding everything else.
Exactly. Then you might have lower level goals like attract and retain loyal customers or increase revenue and profitability. These are more specific, but still aligned with that overall vision.
So they're like the stepping stones, the key milestones along the path to success.
Precisely. And then you can break those down even further into more specific goals like develop a delicious and unique menu or create a welcoming and comfortable atmosphere.
Okay, so it's like a pyramid with that big overarching goal at the top and then these progressively smaller, more granular goals supporting it all the way down.
That's a great way to think about it. And by understanding these different goal levels, BAs can make sure that every increment of work is aligned with that overall vision and is delivering tangible value to the customer.
So it's not just about building features or completing tasks, it's about achieving those meaningful outcomes that contribute to the bigger picture.
Exactly. Now, how does this goal-oriented approach actually contribute to business agility?
Good question, because we've been talking a lot about goals, but how does this tie back to that bigger picture of being agile?
Well, by focusing on goals rather than functions, organizations can become more adaptable and responsive to change. They can quickly adjust their course if a particular approach isn't working or if new opportunities emerge.
So it's like having a GPS system that recalculates your route if you hit traffic or decide to take a detour.
Exactly, and this flexibility is absolutely essential in today's rapidly changing business environment.
You got to be able to pivot.
Exactly. It allows organizations to stay ahead of the curve and adapt to those new challenges and opportunities as they come up.
Now let's talk about how goals are actually used to define iterations and releases.
Okay.
So iterations are those short, time-boxed periods of work in Agile, right?
Exactly.
They're like mini projects,
Yeah.
typically lasting 1 to 4 weeks,
Yeah.
where the team focuses on delivering a specific set of features or functionality.
Exactly. And releases are those bigger milestones where A set of features is made available to the customer.
Okay, so how do goals actually fit into this picture?
Well, each iteration should have a specific goal
Okay,
that's aligned with those overall project goals that the team is working towards.
gotcha.
This makes sure that the team is always focused on delivering value and making progress towards the bigger picture.
So it's like setting a mini goal for each leg of the journey, making sure you're always moving in the right direction.
Exactly. And then releases are planned around achieving a set of related goals. So you might have a release goal of launching a new feature or improving the performance of an existing system.
So it's like planning a vacation. Each day might have a specific goal, like visiting a certain landmark or trying a local restaurant.
Right.
And then the overall trip is planned around achieving a set of goals like relaxing on the beach, exploring a new city, or spending quality time with loved ones.
That's a great analogy. And just like with a vacation, planning and managing those goals effectively is crucial to the success of the project.
Now all this talk about goals makes me wonder, how do you make sure you're choosing the right goals to focus on, especially in an agile environment where priorities can shift and new information is constantly emerging?
That's where prioritization comes in. It's one of the most important skills for an agile BA.
Prioritizations, it sounds simple enough, but I'm sure it's more nuanced than just making a to-do list and checking things off,
You're absolutely right. Effective prioritization in an agile environment requires a deep understanding of the business needs,
right?
the customer's priorities,
Uh-huh.
and the technical feasibility of different options.
So it's like playing a game of chess. You need to think several moves ahead, anticipate your opponent's moves, and make those strategic decisions based on the ever-changing situation.
That's a great analogy. And just like in chess, there are different techniques and strategies that BAs can use to prioritize effectively.
Okay, let's get into the toolbox. What are some of those prioritization techniques?
Well, one common technique is called must-cow, which stands for must have, should have, could have, and won't have.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that one.
It's simple but super effective.
Okay, remind me how it works.
It's a way to categorize requirements based on their importance.
So like sorting your laundry, you've got your must-haves like your work clothes and underwear.
Yes.
Then you got your should-haves like your casual clothes and gym clothes.
Uh-huh.
And then you've got your could-haves like those fancy dresses you rarely wear but can't bear to part with. And finally, you've got your won't-haves like those clothes, you need to get rid of but just haven't gotten around to it yet.
That's a fantastic analogy. And just like with your laundry, it's important to be ruthless in your prioritization. You can't keep everything, and you need to make those tough choices about what's truly essential.
No one wants a closet full of clothes they never wear.
Exactly. Now, have you heard of the Kano model?
I have, but I'm a little fuzzy on the details.
Well, the Kano model is a bit more nuanced. It categorizes requirements based on how they actually impact customer satisfaction.
Okay, break that down for me. What are those different categories?
Well, you've got your basic requirements, which are expected by the customer, but they don't necessarily delight them.
Okay.
Then you've got your performance requirements, which directly impact customer satisfaction. The better you perform on these, the happier the customer will be.
So in our cafe, a basic requirement might be having clean tables and chairs.
Right.
It's expected, but it doesn't necessarily wow the customer. But a performance requirement might be the speed of service. The faster the barista can make that latte, the more satisfied the customer will be.
Precisely. And then you've got your delighter requirements. These go above and beyond customer expectations and create that sense of delight.
So maybe that unexpected little cookie with the latte, or the barista remembering the customer's usual order?
Exactly. Those are the little touches that create a truly memorable experience.
Okay, I get it categories. Now, how do you actually use these models to prioritize?
Well, the key is to identify which requirements fall into each category.
Okay.
And then prioritize accordingly.
So your must-haves are your basic and performance requirements. You got to deliver on those to meet customer expectations and ensure basic satisfaction. Then your should-haves are those performance requirements that have the biggest impact on satisfaction. And your could-haves are those delighters.
That's it.
If you have time and budget, they can really elevate the customer experience.
Exactly.
So it's about understanding that relative importance of different requirements and making those strategic choices about where to focus your efforts.
Exactly. Now let's shift gears and talk about requirements engineering.
Okay, requirements engineering, that art and science of gathering, analyzing, documenting, and managing requirements.
It's a crucial process in any development project, but it definitely takes on a unique flavor in an agile environment.
So what makes requirements engineering different in an agile world?
Well, in those traditional waterfall projects, you typically gather all the requirements up front, document them in detail, and then sign off on them before development even begins.
Right? It's like building a house. You wouldn't start construction until you had a complete set of blueprints.
Exactly. But in Agile, requirements are expected to evolve and change throughout the project.
Right.
So the process of requirements engineering becomes much more iterative and collaborative.
So it's like building a house with Lego blocks. You can start with a basic structure and then add, remove, or rearrange pieces as you go along based on new information and feedback.
That's a great analogy, and this iterative approach allows for that greater flexibility and responsiveness to change, which are really hallmarks of Agile development.
So how do BAs actually do requirements engineering in an agile way? What are some key techniques and practices?
Well, one key practice is focusing on eliciting and documenting those minimum viable requirements for each iteration.
Minimum viable requirements. Okay, break that down for me.
These are the essential requirements that need to be met to actually deliver a working increment of value to the customer.
So it's about focusing on the essentials.
Exactly, the core features that deliver the most value rather than getting bogged down in unnecessary detail.
Gotcha. Keep it lean and mean.
Exactly. Another important practice is to actually use collaborative techniques,
Okay.
like workshops and brainstorming sessions,
Hmm.
to elicit requirements from those stakeholders.
Okay, so we're bringing everyone together.
Exactly. This helps make sure that everyone's on the same page and those requirements actually reflect the diverse needs of the customer.
Right, because it's not about one person dictating what the requirements should be. It's about engaging in that dialogue and coming to a shared understanding.
Precisely. And finally, BAs need to be really good at managing change and those evolving requirements as the project progresses.
Right, because change is inevitable and agile. How do you keep things from going off the rails?
Well, it might involve using techniques like version control to actually track those changes,
Okay.
or holding those regular backlog refinement sessions to update and prioritize the requirements as you go.
So it's all about embracing that change and adapting your approach accordingly, which again are those core principles of agile development. Now let's talk about documentation.
Documentation.
It's a bit of a hot topic in agile.
It is. Some people believe that documentation is completely unnecessary.
Right, working software over comprehensive documentation.
Exactly, while others see it as really essential for communication and knowledge transfer.
So where do you stand on this? What's the right amount of documentation in an agile world?
I think the key, like with most things, is to strike that balance.
Okay.
Remember, the Agile Manifesto values working software over comprehensive documentation, but that doesn't mean documentation is useless.
Right.
It's about creating just enough documentation to be helpful without getting bogged down in unnecessary detail.
So it's like packing for a trip. You don't want to overpack and bring a bunch of stuff you'll never use, but you also don't want to underpack and forget something essential.
That's a great analogy. And the right amount of documentation will vary depending on the project and the needs of the team. Some projects might need more detailed documentation, while others might get by with just a few high-level documents.
So it's about being pragmatic and tailoring your approach to the specific context of the project.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that documentation is a tool, not an end in itself.
Right.
The goal is to create documentation that actually supports the team and helps them deliver value to the customer, not just create documentation for documentation's sake.
Now let's talk about some specific techniques that BAs can use to document requirements in an agile way.
Well, one very popular technique is user stories.
Ah, yes. User stories, those are crucial.
They're short, simple descriptions of a feature or functionality from the perspective of the user.
They're like those little sticky notes you see on agile boards, capturing that key information in a concise and easy-to-understand format.
Exactly. And another technique is acceptance criteria. These are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound statements that define what done looks like for that particular user story.
So they're like the checklist for a user story, making sure that everyone's clear on what needs to be achieved before that story can be considered complete.
Precisely. And then you might also have visual models like wireframes or prototypes,
Okay.
which help to illustrate the user interface and how the system will actually work.
So it's about using a variety of techniques to create that shared understanding of the requirements and make sure that everyone's on the same page.
Exactly. And remember that documentation in an agile environment is a living document.
Oh, that's a good point. It's not set in stone.
Right. It's constantly evolving and changing as the project progresses and new information emerges.
So it's not about creating a static document that's never touched again. It's about creating a dynamic document that reflects that ever-changing nature of the project.
Precisely.
Now I'm curious about the challenges of managing requirements in an agile environment, because it sounds like things could get messy pretty quickly.
Yes. Managing requirements in Agile can definitely be tricky.
Yeah,
One of the biggest challenges is dealing with change and those evolving requirements.
right. Because in an agile world, change is not only expected, it's embraced.
Exactly.
But how do you manage that change effectively without losing sight of those overall goals?
That's the key, isn't it? One important thing is to have a clear process for managing change requests.
Okay.
This might involve using a tool like a change management system to track those requests, assess their impact, and prioritize them accordingly.
So it's about having a system in place to handle those inevitable curveballs and make informed decisions about how to proceed.
Exactly. Another challenge is making sure that the requirements actually stay aligned with the overall business goals.
Right?
This requires regular communication and collaboration between the BA, the product owner, and the development team.
Right, because you don't want to get so caught up in the weeds of individual requirements that you lose sight of the bigger picture. You got to keep your eye on the prize, so to speak.
Exactly. And finally, it's so important to have a clear understanding of the definition of done for each requirement.
Definition of done.
What does it actually mean for a requirement to be considered complete? This helps prevent scope creep and ensures that everyone's on the same page about what constitutes a completed requirement.
So it's about setting those clear expectations and having a shared understanding of what good actually looks like.
Precisely. And by effectively managing these challenges, BAs can help ensure that the project delivers value to the customer and achieves those business goals.
This has been a fantastic discussion about the nuances of business analysis in an agile world.
It is.
It's clear that BAs play such a critical role in understanding that business context, defining and managing requirements, and making sure that the project stays aligned with those overall business goals.
Absolutely.
It's not about rigidly following a set of rules, but rather about embracing that change, working together, and continuously iterating to deliver that value to the customer.
I couldn't agree more.
And we're not done yet. Join us for part 3, where we'll explore the sometimes scary world of agile estimation.
It's an adventure for sure.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're wrapping up our exploration of business analysis in an agile world, and today we're tackling a topic that often causes a bit of a, well, anxiety for those new to agile.
Estimation.
Exactly. It's this whole idea of trying to predict how long things will take when you know change is a constant. It almost feels impossible.
It's definitely a different mindset from those traditional waterfall methodologies where estimates were treated as these set-in-stone commitments.
Right, back in the waterfall days, you'd spend weeks planning everything out up front, and then those estimates became the foundation for, well, the entire project. But in Agile, we're supposed to embrace change and adapt as we go. So how do you even begin to estimate when, the ground is constantly shifting beneath your feet?
I need a mindset shift.
Yeah. Okay.
Instead of thinking of estimates as these fixed predictions, you need to think of them as informed guesses, knowing they'll likely change as you learn more.
So it's like checking the weather forecast before you pack for a picnic. You get an idea of what to expect, but you pack an umbrella just in case.
Exactly. You're using the best information available, but you're also ready to adapt if things change. And that's key to agile estimation: realism, transparency, and flexibility.
Okay, I'm starting to see the light here, but how do you actually go about creating these informed guesses in a way that's truly agile? What are some of the guiding principles?
One really important principle is involving the whole team in the estimation process.
Okay.
This not only tends to lead to more accurate estimates, but it also fosters a sense of shared ownership and accountability.
Right, because it's not just the project manager or the BA saying this is going to take this amount of time. It's the team, the people who are actually doing the work, coming together to figure it out.
Precisely. And this collaborative approach often helps surface hidden assumptions or risks that might not have been obvious otherwise.
That makes sense.
Another important principle is focusing on the relative size of tasks rather than trying to pinpoint their exact duration.
Okay, I'm not sure I follow. What's the difference between relative size and absolute duration?
Absolute duration is saying something like, this task will take exactly 5 hours. But in Agile, that's almost impossible to do accurately, especially early on when there are so many unknowns.
Right, because things can change so quickly, those initial estimates could be way off.
Exactly. So instead, Agile teams often use techniques like story points or t-shirt sizes to estimate the relative size of tasks compared to each other.
So it's like saying, this task is medium compared to that one which we all agree is small.
Precisely. And this relative sizing is much easier to do accurately, especially for those complex tasks that are really hard to break down into smaller pieces.
Okay, that makes sense. But how do you actually use those relative size estimates to plan your iterations and releases? How do you turn those, like t-shirt sizes, into something actionable?
That's what velocity comes in. Velocity measures how much work a team can complete in a given iteration based on their past performance.
So it's like tracking your average speed on a road trip. If you know you typically average, say, 60 miles per hour, you can estimate how long it'll take to reach your destination.
Exactly. By tracking their velocity over several iterations, teams get a pretty good sense of how much work they can realistically handle in the future.
So it's like establishing a track record, a baseline of what the team can achieve.
Precisely. And this historical data helps teams make much more informed decisions about how much work to take on in a sprint and when things are likely to be finished.
That makes sense. Now, let's talk about some specific techniques for agile estimation. I've heard of something called planning poker, and it sounds, well, kind of fun, actually.
It can be quite engaging. It's a collaborative technique that uses cards with different values representing those story points or t-shirt sizes we talked about.
So it's like a game of poker, but instead of betting money, you're betting on effort.
Exactly. Each team member picks a card that represents their estimate, and then everyone reveals their card at the same time.
Okay.
If there's agreement, great, but if not, the team discusses the reasons for the different estimates and tries to reach a consensus.
So it's a fun way to get everyone talking, see different perspectives, and ultimately come up with a more accurate estimate as a group.
Exactly, and it also helps to ensure that everyone's on the same page and that there's a shared understanding of the work involved.
Now, what about those tasks that are just too big, too complex to estimate accurately? How do you handle those in an agile environment?
That's a great question, and it's one that often trips up teams who are new to Agile. The key is to break those large tasks down into smaller, more manageable chunks that can be estimated more easily.
It's like trying to guess the weight of an elephant just by looking at it. You'd have no idea. But if you could break it down into its parts, the legs, the trunk, the ears, you could start to get a more realistic picture.
Exactly. That's called decomposition or disaggregation. It's a key skill for any Agile BA, working with the team to find those natural dividing lines in the work and create those smaller units to estimate and track.
So it's like taking a complex recipe and breaking it down step by step. Instead of trying to cook the entire meal at once, you focus on one step at a time, making sure each one is right before moving on.
That's a great way to think about it. This incremental approach not only makes estimation easier, but also allows for more flexibility and responsiveness to change. If a task turns out to be more complex than you initially thought, you can adjust your estimates without derailing the whole project.
That makes a lot of sense. As we wrap up this deep dive into Agile business analysis, what are some key takeaways for our listeners? What's most important to remember about estimation in an Agile world?
I think the most important thing is to embrace change, be transparent, and collaborate effectively.
So it's not about creating a perfect plan up front, but about making a good enough plan and then being ready to adapt as you go along.
Precisely. And it's so important to remember that estimates are not commitments, they're informed guesses that can change as new information comes up.
So be realistic. Acknowledge that you don't have a crystal ball. Things will change, and you need to be ready for that.
Exactly. And finally, remember that estimation is a skill that takes time and practice to develop. Don't be afraid to experiment with different techniques and find what works best for your team.
So it's all about continuous improvement, always learning and getting better.
Absolutely. By embracing these principles, estimation becomes less of a chore and more of a collaborative process that actually helps your team deliver real value to the customer.
This has been such a fantastic deep dive into the world of Agile business analysis. We've covered so much. Understanding the business context, defining and managing requirements, and now mastering Agile estimation.
It's been a pleasure exploring these concepts with you.
Absolutely. We hope our listeners now have a deeper understanding of how important business analysts are in helping Agile teams navigate all that complexity and achieve amazing results. Until next time, keep those Agile minds sharp and never stop learning.